As far as his fit in the NFL, I feel like it's pretty easy to see him slide into an NFL offense. He's experienced out wide in the slot, he's experienced moving in motion, has run routes at all levels at a good level, and on top of that, he's a very twitchy athlete and has great ball skills, which further gives me confidence that he can be successful in the NFL. I'm not going to go as far as to comp him to him later on, but there are a lot of similarities to Calvin Ridley. Hey y'all! For this video, we'll continue going through the 2025 wide receiver prospects and have a pretty star-studded set of receivers this part. For this part, I'll be covering Dont'e Thornton Jr. from Tennessee, Elic Ayomanor from Stanford, Elijhah Badger from Florida, Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, and Isaac TeSlaa from Arkansas. If you're new to these, my wide receiver evals use some different grading methods. If you want more details on these, you can check out part 1 of the series, which should be accessible with the link that should be on the screen now, as I have more details on how I do my grading in that. Also, if you want to check out my grades and evals of the receivers from last year for reference, you can check them out with the link in the description. For any new viewers, I have evals and full scouting reports out for players like Andrew Armstrong, Bo Collins, and more if you want to check them out on my channel. I'll be continuing going through my top 50 receivers in the draft, so to be sure you don't miss any other parts of the wide receiver series or any other positional group series in the future, be sure to subscribe. Now let's take a look at Thornton. Starting with a look at Thornton's basic stats, he'll probably cause a lot of double takes if you're just checking his season totals. He had just 34 targets for just 26 receptions, which may make you think, okay, so he probably just didn't play much or contribute much. And then you look at his 661 receiving yards for ridiculous yards per catch of 25.4, as well as catching 6 touchdowns, or essentially getting a touchdown on nearly a quarter of his receptions and nearly a fifth of his targets. And now it's like, okay, what the heck is going on here? Well, some guys get labeled as vertical players in the sense that they primarily run vertical patterns when they don't get work underneath. Thornton, however, though, is almost exclusively a vertical guy, as he primarily runs vertical patterns, which shows with an impressive ADOT of 16.5 for 2024 and 15.3 for his career. We'll talk more about his routes and route running later, so we'll go back to that later on. But to circle back to his stats, he did also have 2 drops and unsurprisingly played the majority of snaps out wide. Looking at his highlight games against Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama, we do see the trade-off of being a nearly exclusive vertical guy, as he had some games like against Alabama when he had 3 receptions for 70 yards, but a number of games like Ohio State and Georgia when he had just 1 reception for 14 yards against Ohio State and no receptions at all against Georgia. The other trade-offs are not getting very many opportunities in terms of targets, with no more than 3 targets in any of his highlighted games. We saw a lot of those same struggles in Thornton, getting more than 3 receptions in just 1 of his 13 games and more than 3 targets in just 3 of his 13 games in 2024. The other scary thing is that as bad as it looks for 2024, we can even see it be even worse in his career stats, with only 10 career games out of his 42 college games where he had 3 or more receptions, as well as more than 3 targets in just 6 of his college games throughout his entire career. Those are very poor volume stats and will likely continue to stay that poor if he only stays a vertical option and depending on what team he gets drafted to. But to see if he is more than just a speed threat, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he's natural at finishing catches over his shoulders. He has such a great eye to track the ball downfield and chase it down, and he also does a good job working back to his quarterback on his hitches. When catching the ball, he catches the ball with good hand technique and consistently catches it away from his body. He also showed good ability to be able to rise up and maximize his frame to go get the ball on short patterns and some of his post patterns. Now, he had a very limited number of opportunities in these situations due to his route tree, but his ability to finish catches through contact may not be as good as his 75 success rate may suggest, especially considering this is just based on 4 opportunities in 2024. The biggest reason why I have concerns this is due to his lapses in proper technique to be able to protect the ball from defenders, which could lead to more missed opportunities in the NFL. Also, he can sometimes be a bit delayed in his attacks on the ball, which can make matters worse. So with a bit more than meat size than what his numbers show, Thornton earned a B for his hands, a B- for his jump ball and contested catch, and a B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, with his great speed, he's able to naturally threaten the defense with his vertical every play to make things easier on his hitch routes. Other than that though, we start to see how raw of a player he truly is. As I mentioned, he ran nearly the same route, either running a vertical, post, or hitch route on every play. In very rare cases, he'll throw in a slant when he's feeling spicy, but most times it was just one of those 3. While that can work for Tennessee's gimmicky offense, that will not fly in the NFL for most teams. And even in those routes that he did run, he had poor use of tempo in his routes, which limited how consistently he could get open downfield. Also, his cuts were pretty sloppy due to being too upright in his breaks, and those rounded cuts also ended up giving defenders room to be able to catch up and cover his route underneath. When he did try to tighten things up a little bit, he often needed multiple extra steps to be able to make sharp cuts. I also noticed a number of times when he could be taken out of the play and even out of bounds by physical coverage, which could be problematic in the NFL with his limited skill set. It's also just difficult to be able to assess his ability to be able to beat press, since in the majority of his snaps he was able to get a free release and avoid press. So despite a good start, we are starting to see a few holes in him, with just a D+ for his route running and a C- for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism are RAS. Once he makes the catch, he's off to the races as he can blaze past defenders and get to full speed in an instant. That's also pretty impressive with his blocking. He has very good effort and even good form in his blocks. He also does a good job getting leverage in the blocks despite his size as well. While he is undoubtedly fast, I'm not positive he can add more after the catch other than just with his speed. He seems to lack great moves in open space and lacks the creativity and timing to make defenders miss. For his future role in an NFL roster, I feel he has one of the most clear paths for a lot of the receivers in this class. He very clearly has the ability to be a vertical threat, but I just worry if he can handle anything outside of that consistently. Also, if he goes to a team that doesn't use a lot of deep shots very often, I just don't see him serving too much of a benefit being out there other than just trying to open up routes underneath. But in terms of an impact he can have by catching the ball, it already has been pretty minimal in college, so it's just hard to expect it to get much better in the NFL. On top of that, he has such a thin frame that I think press is going to give him a lot of issues and further limit him. I think his speed, size, and blocking will draw teams in, but they need to make sure he's a good fit for their offensive quarterback before taking him. So Thornton ended up earning a good B+ for his yards after catch potential, a solid B- for his future role, especially considering his limitations, but again, I think it's just easy to project a role for him in the NFL, and then an A for his athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his strengths, this will be pretty straightforward and feel repetitive, but he is so fast and a very interesting vertical threat. What also helps him win deep is his ability to be able to stack defenders and track the ball over his shoulders to routinely finish deep targets. He also showed the possibility of having ball skills to be more involved on just deep passes, but it may be more of a TBD to be able to see if he can prove it. Finally, he is a very good blocker, which is very important for him to be able to earn a role as an X receiver in the NFL and to be able to help keep him on the field more than he was in college. While he is good at running vertical patterns, it's just kind of all he does. So it's great he can do that well, but he just needs to be able to prove he can handle a more expensive route tree, otherwise I have concerns if he'll continue to fail to be very useful on an every down-to-down basis like he was in college. For the non-vertical routes he ran, he lacked good tempo and had sloppy cuts showing that it's going to be a bit of a marathon to get his route running up to snuff. I also have concerns that his success in contested catch situations is also misleading since it's just based on 4 opportunities, and his technique in those situations suggests he could falter more. Finally, his release could make or break him since he is often protected from it in college and will have to regularly face it in the NFL. So by taking the average of all his grades, Thornton earned a 2.75 out of 4, which puts him in my good role player tier. Thornton is a physical freak who some may try to comp to DK Metcalf or even Mike Evans. Now there are a number of differences, but the biggest difference why those comps don't exactly hold up is that Metcalf and Evans are both 20 pounds heavier than Thornton, and that may sound like a minor thing, but that extra weight gave those receivers more momentum to be able to drive downfield, stack defenders, and become a freight train on their vertical patterns. While Thornton can stack defenders, I can't confidently say he can do the others two consistently against press with the limited reps he had. So as a comp, I instead have Martavis Bryant as his comp. Both have blazing speed and consistently stack their defenders to open up their basket for the quarterback. Both also have really good ball tracking skills to be able to finish catches over their shoulders. Outside of that though, both are really questionable contributors with sloppy route running and questionable ability to play through contact due to their frame. Bryant went to a perfect landing spot to kickstart his career, and it's not impossible that the same could happen to Thornton. However, if he goes to a team that doesn't like to air it out that often or wants more out of him, I fear he's going to be in trouble. Going to our next receiver, Elic Ayomanor from Stanford. After having a breakout year in 2023, catching 62 receptions for 1,013 yards and 6 touchdowns, he's expected to take the next step in 2024. Unfortunately, he failed to take that next step statistically and actually regressed in his yardage total. Quarterback play definitely had a lot to do with it, but regardless, he ended up having just 109 targets for 63 receptions for 831 yards and 6 touchdowns. Also, he did have 6 drops for a drop rate of 8.7% and played majority of snaps outside. Looking at his highlight games against SMU, Notre Dame, and Clemson, he got a fair amount of targets in each of these games with at least 5 in each, and even as high as 9 against SMU and 11 against Clemson. The problem is they failed to record more than 4 receptions in any of them and failed to get more than 55 yards despite the high number of targets. Again, quarterback play had a lot to do with this, but we've seen other receivers still rise through those challenges. I think the biggest concerning thing for me though is that despite the high number of targets, he only had more than 5 receptions in just 4 of his 12 games in 2024, which is very poor with that type of volume. So to see if he had those poor results due to talent or due to quarterback play, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, though he can have some lapses in concentration technique, he made some sensational catches with some great adjustment skills through contact. Something that he did this season as well that helped him be more successful was establishing better position in jump ball situations. Last year he could sometimes not use his frame to box out defenders, but he did a much better job this year using that frame to be able to maximize his opportunities. He also has such a big catch radius with his size to be able to go low and go up high for off-target throws, which he had to do pretty often this year. He also looked comfortable finishing catches over his shoulders, which is essential if he wants to remain a vertical threat in the NFL. Now while he did have incredible flashes of ball skills, like I said, he does struggle with some lapses in hand technique and concentration drops at times. Also, he can be a bit slow to react to balls with his approach, but may be part of what contributes to some of those lapses and some missed opportunities in contested catch situations, with a 48% success rate in those situations. So despite the flashes, Ayomanor earned just a B- for his hands, B for his jump ball contested catch, and B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, while some may recognize him for his high-level real catches or his vertical ability, what first jumped out to me was his route running. Despite his build, he runs around with really good hip sync to be able to make some really sharp cuts. He also has a good understanding how to win with leverage, especially in the short and intermediate routes. In those routes, he also does a great job setting up his defender to open up his hips and be able to break away the other way. If you want to see textbook way how to do this, go watch his film against Colorado in 2023 when he kept doing this against Travis Hunter, and Hunter just could not stop him. What also makes him successful in those routes is his use of head fakes and tempo, which added a bit of deception to his routes. He can also use those to beat man coverage, but is also a good zone beater thanks to his ability to have a good eye for openings in the defense. On his deep patterns, he can also do a good job stacking the defender to make an easier throwing windows for his quarterback. So he ran a very diverse route tree, which will give him a lot of potential as a route runner in the NFL. That being said, though Ayomanor can make clean cuts, his cuts often aren't the quickest or have the best burst. Last year I credited some of the lack of explosion in his cuts due to recovering from his ACL. However, I just didn't see much if any improvements in his cuts this year, which was really disappointing to see. That lack of improved burst and sometimes lacking foot speed led to inconsistencies in being able to separate from defenders. What also led to some of his difficulties in separating as well was his release. While it's still good, he sometimes doesn't have the quickness to be able to keep himself clean and away from contact. That led to defenders being able to stay in his hip pocket and be able to stay close to be able to make a play on the ball. So with a lot more good than bad in both, Ayomanor continues to be a B student with a B+ in his route running and a B for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role in athleticism or RAS, when he makes a catch, he has good transition to a runner and very good straight line speed to pick up yards if there's an opening. Also, he's a good blocker who blocks with good leverage and a sturdy base. His strength and frame also lets him hold up as a blocker to keep openings clear for his teammates. Despite his speed though, his ability to create after the catch is pretty disappointing. He has great speed for his size, but is a bit stiff in his change of direction ability, which can limit him after the catch. Also, his moves in open space suffer from the same issue as his cuts, as they are often too slow developing to successfully make defenders miss. He also has disappointing contact balance for his size, since at his size I'd expect him to break more tackles, but he often went down to initial contact way too frequently. Also, he just doesn't seem to be an overly creative runner in space and often just gets tunnel vision. So I think he has the makings of an X receiver with his build, vertical ability, route running, release, and blocking, but the big thing is how successful he can be creating separation and if he can improve his hands. I had hoped that he would be able to improve in both this season, but both kind of just remained about the same. So I'm just a little bit worried that he may have already plateaued a bit and could fall behind other receivers who are currently ascending. Either way, as long as he does a decent job catching the ball, he could at least be a very safe X receiver for a team. So Ayomanor breaks his B streak with a C in his yards after catch potential, but then returns to it with a B in his future role. Then he makes up for that C with an A for his athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his strengths, there's a lot to like about Ayomanor with his really great route running skills with nuanced route running and clean cuts. Then you add in his ball tracking skills and his ability to win downfield, and he starts to become a really versatile player who can help in a number of different ways. Also, his big catch radius is the cherry on top to help create more room for errors on throws in his direction. Now, the Stanford quarterback still found a way to miss him on a regular basis, but still, hopefully he'll have better luck with quarterback play in the NFL. While he has a lot that he can do to be able to give him a very good floor, he's a bit stiff and uninspiring in open space which could affect his ceiling. Also, there is a risk that his floor may be lower than I want to admit, since he sometimes can have trouble clearing contact against press and can also struggle to get clear separation. That separation piece especially is concerning since space only gets tighter in the NFL, so that could be a very big issue for him. Finally, his hands could also present an issue if he continues to have lapses in hand technique and miss out on opportunities. So by taking the average of all his grades, Ayomanor earned a 3.04 out of 4, which puts him in a good starter tier. As much as I'm still a fan of Ayomanor, he unfortunately doesn't have the ceiling I'd hoped for, since his lack of burst in his cuts will be an ongoing issue. I still think he can help contribute as a vertical threat and has good ability to win underneath with his route running. However, I just don't know if he has what it takes to be a top receiver for a team, and more likely is best suited as a receiver 2 for a team to complement a twitchy, more explosive receiver who wins underneath. As for a comp, I have Michael Crabtree as Ayomanor's comp. Both have flashes of great hands and the range to be able to make some impressive catches away from their body. Also, both show good ability to run routes with good nuance, but can struggle to consistently separate due to lack of burst in their cuts. Also, neither are likely suited to be top receivers, but can operate as a complementary receiver for a team. Crabtree enjoyed a long productive career despite rarely putting up great production numbers. I think Ayomanor could do the same and could be a player who helps off the stat sheet as well with his ability to stretch a defense and help as a blocker. Going to our next wide receiver and someone I'm very excited to talk about, Elijhah Badger from Florida. Starting with a look at his basic stats, they aren't too remarkable with just 61 targets for 39 receptions and 4 touchdowns, but his 806 yards for a yards per catch of 20.6 is really impressive. What I personally found impressive with this is that a major criticism of him going into this year was his inability to be able to get production down the field and being too reliant on plays after the catch on the short areas of the field. Well, this year is kind of the inverse of what he was in previous years, with his ADOT increasing by a full 10 points from 2023, going from 7.3 to 17.3 in 2024. What was also great to see was him making the adjustments downfield without having more drops. A lot of times these shallow option receivers can show lapses in ball tracking or hand technique when working more down the field, but Badger's hands held up in that transition. Also had a good mix of snaps out wide and in the slot, with nearly 80% out wide and about 20% from the slot. The thing that is a bit of a wet blanket though is his inconsistent production, which we can see in his highlight games against Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas A&M. I mentioned this back in my Chimera DK section, but Florida had some pretty rough quarterback play this year after quarterback Graham Mertz got injured, and G.T. Lagway just didn't look ready to be a starter. So we saw those inconsistencies with him only getting more than 2 receptions in just the Texas A&M games of his highlighted games, and only managing to get more than 3 receptions in 3 of his 12 games in 2024, which that is a pretty low mark. But to see why I'm still excited with him despite that inconsistent production, let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, when he's going for the catch, he consistently uses good hand technique, which showed with 0 drops in 2024 and just a 4.2% career drop rate. He consistently catches the ball away from his body and can make some really impressive body adjustments to off-target throws to give him a big catch radius. He even showed good sideline awareness to finish tough catches around the sidelines. Finally, he showed some really tough hands to finish catches through contact, as he converted 68.8% of his chances in 2024. That being said, he does have the risk for this to decrease due to being unable to box out defenders and sometimes letting physical or aggressive defenders outmuscle him for balls due to his lack of urgency at times and also his smaller frame. Also, he can sometimes be a bit nonchalant with his approach, which can lead to a bit more difficult approaches to balls. So Badger has a good start with a B for his hands, B- for his jump ball contested catch, and an A- for his body control ball tracking. For his route running and release, his fluidity shows in his route running. While there is some polish needed, his fluid movements, twitch, and burst give him a lot of potential to become a great route runner with the right coaching. Also, his experience running a diverse route tree also gives hopes for improvement in that area. At Arizona State, he had poor quarterback play and was typically used on short passes, so the quarterback had easier completions and could leverage Badger's skills after the catch. Then when he went to Florida, like I said, he kind of turned into the opposite type of player, regularly running intermediate to deep routes. So the ability to be a good player in both styles shows great versatility. Also, his experience playing both inside and outside also makes it a little bit easier for him to earn a role in the NFL. As for how his route running is now, his best attribute other than his movement skills is the tempo he brings to his routes. That lets him get uncovered as he plays with the defense and maximizes athleticism. He also has a great eye to find openings in defense to be able to beat zone coverage as well. He also showed a lot of promise in his release. With his athleticism, he has very quick feet to get defenders off balance and has good awareness of how to set them up to be able to get early leverage against his defender. Also, he can also use arm counters effectively to help clear contact and get out on his route. Now, while his routes can look very fluid and get him open on a regular basis, he seems to potentially have variable effort and consistency, which impact his success rate. I hate assuming a player's effort, but when I notice that as a possible issue, especially in players who have the ability to be better than they performed, it does make me concerned. Regardless of possible effort issues, he needs to clean up the cuts in his routes. He is capable of making some very sharp cuts, but he often just doesn't break down enough and settles on rounded cuts. I would like to see him slow down his process a little bit more on double moves so he can better sell the initial move. On the contrary, there are a few times when he was a little bit slower working in the middle when trying to find openings in the middle against zone defense, which can delay him being a viable option for the quarterback. I'd also like to see him sell his vertical a little bit more, as defenders didn't seem overly concerned and seemed ready to jump underneath routes like hitch routes. On those hitch routes, he can also sometimes give up leverage and make things easier for the defender as well. So with questionable consistency in the route running, he earned just a C+ for his route running. However, with good release discipline, he earned a B for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism or RAS, his fluidity and twitch shines out after the catch as he's able to change direction on a dime and has great timing in his cuts to consistently make defenders miss. He also has great acceleration to get to full speed very quickly and enough breakaway speed to pick up some big gains. When things are more congested over the middle or on screen plays, he can operate with great vision to make the most of his opportunities. However, his blocking will need improvements as he has delayed hands in his blocking. He's a pretty ineffective blocker who more often than not is just a speed bump than a roadblock for with how easily defenders can get past him. He also often takes poor angles with his blocks and uses poor hand technique, which could lead to more holding penalties in the NFL. Also, he's a very upright blocker with little to no leverage, which seems to worsen the quality of his blocks as well. As far as his fit in the NFL, I feel like it's pretty easy to see him slide into an NFL offense. He's experienced out wide in the slot, he's experienced moving in motion, has run routes at all levels at a good level, and on top of that he's a very twitchy athlete and has great ball skills, which further gives me confidence that he can be successful in the NFL. I'm not going to go as far as to comp him to him later on, but there are a lot of similarities to Calvin Ridley. But if he wants to reach that type of ridiculous ceiling, he needs to show better consistency and potentially better effort. If he does that though, I think the sky could be the limit. So Badger continues to do great with a B+ for his yards after catch potential, B for his future role, and A- for his athleticism or RAS. As a summary of his strengths, he's a very twitchy, fluid athlete who can easily escape defenders for big plays. Also, he has fantastic ball skills to make some really impressive catches on balls that other receivers likely wouldn't be able to reach. He also shows some really great versatility with ample experience playing inside and outside, as well as being used in motion. He also even showed a lot of versatility and good foundation in his route running, especially with him being so productive down the field in 2024. Finally, his release is also promising and shows a good understanding how to get leverage very early on with his movement skills. So when Badger's on his A game, he looks awesome. But I just worry whether or not he may not be giving it 100% every play, and if that could come back to bite him or hold him back from reaching his potential. Also, he can sometimes be a bit delayed in having his hands ready in his release, which can especially be costly for him since defenders can throw him off balance due to his thin frame. His thin frame also makes it too easy for defenders to throw him off balance in his routes and take him out of plays. Also, more physical defenders are able to easily get off his blocks, making it less beneficial to have him out there on run plays. So by taking the average of all his grades, Badger earned a 3.08 out of 4, which puts him in my good starter tier. I know these grades in this eval may seem like I'm just throwing this out there as a hot take, but I truly see a potentially great player in Badger. The big thing for him is to show more consistency and silence my concerns about his effort. If he can do that and polish his route running and do a better job playing through contact, watch out. As for a comp, as I mentioned, if I want to do an extremely lofty comp, I do see shades of Calvin Ridley in this game. Now, I don't think I see the polish that Ridley had, and hopefully he doesn't have the gambling problem that Ridley had as well, but that is what I'm talking about with the potential that he has. As for what I think is a more realistic projection, I have Jerome Simpson as a comp. Simpson had a slow start to his career as he needed polish and was stuck behind quality receivers, but did shine near the end of his rookie deal. Both Simpson and Badger are very fluid, explosive athletes who can make some impressive adjustments to off-target throws and moves in open space. Also, both have great bursts that could let them be great route runners. However, both have thin frames, which leads to difficulties in maintaining their route, and both also need to sharpen up their route running and cuts to be more consistent forces. Also, both could struggle with the physicality in their ball attacks and in contested catch situations. There are also concerns that both sometimes lack consistent effort and focus, which could impact if they can reach their ceiling. Simpson had his career derailed due to a run-in with the law, but he seemed on pace to be a solid contributor. If Badger stays out of trouble and has taken another wing of a veteran receiver, or lands with a great coaching staff, I think he could be a great value and a late-round success story. Moving to our next receiver and the most well-known receiver of this part, Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. Starting to look at his basic stats, despite being viewed as a complimentary piece by some for Ohio State, Egbuka was very productive, earning 106 targets and getting 81 receptions for 1,011 yards and 10 touchdowns out of them. Now, I do think it's fair to point out that part of the reason his season totals were high was because Ohio State had an extended playoff run, which ended up in them winning the national championship. So while a lot of other players we've talked about had season statistics based on 12, 13 games, Egbuka's are based off 16 games. Despite the extra games, he didn't have very many drops at 5 for a drop rate of 5.8%. Also, if you aren't familiar with Egbuka, he's known to play from the slot, especially with the number of great outside receivers Ohio State has had during his time, leading to him playing slightly over 80% of his snaps from the slot in 2024. Taking a look at his highlight games against Notre Dame, Texas, and Oregon in the playoffs, he had a good playoff finish in part due to Will Howard stepping up in the playoffs, but we also saw him get at least 5 receptions and 50 yards in all of his highlight games and playoff games if you include the Tennessee game as well. While he didn't put up gaudy numbers and only got double-digit targets in 3 of his 16 2024 games, he was still a consistent force with at least 5 receptions in 10 of his 16 games and at least 50 yards in 12 of his 16. So to see if his grades also show a very strong and reliable receiver, let's pivot to those. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, he catches the ball with good hand technique and reliable hands. He routinely catches the ball away from his body and can make adjustments to poorly misplaced balls. His ball tracking skills are also a bit underrated as well since he wasn't a deep threat, but he showed great concentration and consistently finished catches over his shoulders. With him working more in the shorter areas and in the middle of the field, he needed to have great hands, which thankfully he showed with his impressive hand strength to be able to snatch and hold on to the ball, and was never shy about going after the ball even if it led to a hit, and converting on 59.1% of his contested catch situations. That means that he did seem a bit hesitant with his attacks on balls at times, since he sometimes can mistime his attack and can struggle to establish good positioning on 50-50 balls. Also, though he can make adjustments to off-target throws, he can sometimes come off just a wee bit stiff in his approach and not have the explosiveness in his jumps which can affect his approach. So Egbuka got off to a very good start with a B+ for his hands, B- for his jump ball and consistent catch, and B+ for his body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he's one of, if not the best route runner in the class. While a number of receivers in this class seem like they're just relying on their athleticism, Egbuka brings so much nuance and understanding how to win with his routes that makes him an easy separator. He has a very good understanding how to set up his defenders to win leverage quickly, and he also has great use of tempo to get the cornerbacks off balance and does a great job working back to the ball to help keep them uncovered. He's also good at attacking the corner and getting their hips to open up with his footwork, and use head fakes to be able to break to the other side. His cuts are also really snappy and clean thanks to him getting great hip sync and having clean footwork in his cuts. He also has a good eye for seeking out and attacking openings against the defense, which is vital for his success as a slot receiver in the NFL. His veteran experience and route running craftsmanship just really shines since he just looks in great control in all his routes. While he has ways he can develop his release, which we'll get into soon, he did do a better job using his hands and footwork to help keep himself clean on his routes. However, despite the hope that his release can improve further, it will take a bit of projection since he just isn't battle tested on the outside against press. His snap percentage from the slot increased every year and peaked in 2024 at 81.1%. His lack of experience shows a pretty minimal release package, which can win in some instances, but likely will need to be more diverse to be able to hold up in the NFL through the full course of a game and season. Also, though he had better hand use, he still could have some trouble shaking off physical coverage. Finally, while he is a great route runner on short and intermediate routes, he was seldom asked to run deep routes. In deep routes he did run, he often failed to get defenders to bite to create separation and struggled to stack his defender. So Egbuka ended up earning the highest route running grade of the entire receiver class with an A- for his route running. Unfortunately, he didn't score as high for his release and got just a D+. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism or RAS, the funny thing with how this group broke down is that Egbuka is actually the least athletic player by RAS standards. So he must be super unathletic, right? Well, he still got a 9.27 RAS score, which is still elite, and just shows how ridiculous this group of athletes is in this part. Random observation aside, he showed good athleticism after the catch and a bit of wiggle to pick up some yards after the catch. He helped himself after the catch with good transition from receiver to runner and good vision to follow his blocks. Speaking of blocks, I feel like his blocking is such an underrated part of his game. He puts in great effort while also having a sturdy base to keep his defender in front of him. He also has good hand use to be able to be sticky with his defender. That being said, he does have trouble shaking off defenders due to average at-bat contact balance, and likely won't get better in the NFL. He also can be a little bit limited after the catch since he doesn't have great explosion in his cuts. Also, there were times when it seemed like he was rushing things and didn't let his blockers establish their blocks and missed some bigger openings had he just waited to be able to run through them. As for a fit on an NFL roster, it's a bit tricky for him because he is a great route runner, has good size, hands, and athleticism, which at worst gives him a very good floor. I think it just depends on if an NFL team needs a slot receiver or not, or if they feel comfortable having him convert to the outside. Personally, I think he would have struggled transitioning to the outside, which will make him a bit more of a project and might be better off keeping him on the inside where he works best. But then it becomes a game if a team does need a slot receiver or not, and that could be a big limiting thing for him in the draft and determining where he goes. So for his yards after catch potential, despite the elite testing, he earned a B. For his future role, with the limitation of potentially being bound to the slot, he earned a B as well. Finally, for his athleticism, his high RAS score got him an A-. As a summary of his strengths, he has very tough, reliable hands that will impress the team and make him a quarterback's favorite target. He also shows great control in his routes to get easy separation and make himself an option on nearly every pass play. On times when he was able to branch out downfield, he shows some really impressive ball tracking skills which could help him unlock a new way to be able to beat defenses. Finally, if he isn't beating defenses in the air, he will beat them with his quality blocks. That being said, the biggest concern for him is how he can handle to do things that he wasn't asked to do very much in college. Can he work out on the outside, and can he win against press with his release? Can he be more consistent downfield to add a bit more versatility to him? Outside those unknowns, he also needs to improve his timing with his ball attacks, as he can sometimes have some missed opportunities. Finally, despite the great athletic testing, he isn't that dynamic with the ball in his hands due to average contact balance and burst, which makes him a bit more difficult to evade tacklers. So by taking the average of all his grades, Egbuka earned a 3.12 out of 4, which puts him in my good starter tier. While there may be some who are more hopeful that he can play outside, his lack of success downfield, his A.DOT dropping each of the last 3 years, and his increased snap percentage in the slot all kind of paint the picture of a player who will likely be a slot exclusive player in the NFL. While that is deflating and can make him a bit more difficult of a fit for all teams, I do think there's a lot of value that he can add to a team. His smoothness as a route runner and quality athleticism bodes well being able to cleanly avoid contact, typically translating to a successful NFL receiver. He may not have a high ceiling or an easy fit as some of the other prospects, but I can easily see him being a starter in week 1. As for a comp, I've seen some people comp him to Amon-Ra St. Brown, which I think I'm a bit wary of doing since that is such a high projection. St. Brown's become the new Cooper Kupp where every slot receiver is basically a comp to him whether it fits or not. However, I do see him having a chance of reaching that potential, but anyway, to be a bit more conservative, I have him comped to Christian Kirk. Though the size isn't perfect, both play the majority of their snaps from the slot and are very good route runners with concise cuts. Also, both know how to win with tempo and get consistent leverage. Both also have very strong hands to make catches over the middle and enough athleticism to get some yards after the catch. However, neither are blazers nor have great bursts to be big play weapons on a regular basis. That also show with their limitations to be able to win downfield and get consistent separation on deeper routes. Both also show some traits to potentially be solid against press, but have very limited experience against it and are likely slot-only players. It might be awkward to have Kirk as his comp, since at the time of writing this, he was just traded by the Jaguars. However, he has been a quality player for the majority of his career, and I could see Egbuka doing the same. He might slide in the draft due to being limited to the slot, but that just creates better value for a team who has a place for him on their NFL roster. Moving to the final receiver of this part, Isaac TeSlaa from Arkansas. TeSlaa's been a riser due to his great combine performance where he had the 11th best RASP since 1987. So his size and athleticism is amazing. The on-field production, though, might lose some people. He had just 36 targets for 28 receptions and 3 touchdowns in 2024. Now the good thing is that he had 546 yards receiving, which equaled out to a very good yards per reception of 19.5. The other thing that I do think is getting overlooked when people are hyping him up though is the fact that he's essentially a part-time player for a lot of the year. But regardless, he did look solid in those limited snaps with 0 drops for the year. With a 6'4", 214-pound frame, you'd probably expect someone to primarily get snaps from the outside. However, he actually did most of his work from the slot, which makes him even more interesting. Taking a look at his highlight games against Texas, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M, his production is all over the place with just 1 target and reception against Texas for 7 yards, then a good 3 receptions for 65 yards against Ole Miss, and then a great 5 receptions for 120 yards and a touchdown against Texas A&M. So I don't think we're really going to get too much of a great sense of how he is as a player based on his stats, so let's take a look at some of his grades. For his hands, jump ball, contested catch, body control, and ball tracking, with his big frame he has a big catch radius and does a good job holding onto the balls thrown at the very end of it. He's also capable of rising up to attack the ball and has good timing with his strikes. He also shows a lot of toughness going for catches as he's never afraid to make a play on the ball regardless of whether he's going to get hit or not. Even with that aggressiveness, he has been very successful in contested catch situations the past 2 seasons with a success rate of 54.2%. He also shows really great focus with 0 drops in the same time frame as I mentioned before. His hands are also one of the best attributes as he maximizes them by consistently using arm extensions when making catches. Hill does a good job working back to the quarterback to make a more QB-friendly target. Also, he's very comfortable following the ball downfield and finishing catches over his shoulders. Something I would like to see him do better though is use his big frame to be able to protect the ball and box out defenders from breaking up passes. Also, as I mentioned, he did most of this on very few targets, so it's hard to know if his hands would still hold up this well if he had a higher target volume. So TeSlaa got off to a great start with a B+ in his hands, jump ball, contested catch, and body control and ball tracking. For his route running and release, he ran a good mix of routes at all levels of the field to add even more versatility. With his limited playing time, his lack of experience shows in his route running with sloppy cuts that seems like he's just relying on his athleticism. His guts also lack the explosiveness to create separation due to being too upright and not getting enough hip sync. That lack of separation persists in the rest of his routes and causes him to have a lot less separation than he should have with his athleticism. His struggles against physical coverage can also sometimes play a big part in this, as defenders can often dictate where his routes go. Also, he will sometimes try to use stem fakes to add some nuance, but these are pretty unsuccessful in tricking defenders. He also didn't look very confident finding openings against zone, which again, speaks to him just often relying on his athleticism against man coverage. So after a great start, TeSlaa started to fall due to technical defects, with a D+ for his route running and D for his release. For his yards after catch potential, future role, and athleticism are RAS. As I mentioned, he had one of the best combine performances of all time relative to his size, so the speed is clearly there and on display at every play. Also, despite his tall height, he runs with good pad level, which can make him tough to bring down at times. Despite that great athleticism and pad level at his size, I was kind of disappointed in his ability after the catch. He kind of just relies on his athleticism or straight line speed, specifically after the catch. He doesn't have very much wiggle or creativity in space either, and typically just relies on outrunning to his defender, which will be less viable in the NFL. His vision is also nothing special, he sometimes just kind of picks a path and sticks to it. He can also look a bit awkward when he turns upfield after the catch, which further limits his ability to pick up extra yards. Also, though he ran with a good pad level, he wasn't breaking tackles on a regular basis in college, so I think he'll most likely end up being taken down by first contact in most instances in the NFL. As for how he fits in the NFL, I think there are some people who are really excited about him and some fans who view him as a fun chess piece, but I'm just not there. He's just a very limited player from a technical standpoint, which will stand as a barrier to him getting playing time and serving as a contributor. I think if he was more ready to handle more opportunities, he would have done that more at Arkansas since they needed playmakers and he's easily the most athletic one they have. So I just think it's very hopeful projection to assume that someone who's a part-time player for part of the year at Arkansas is suddenly going to become a regular contributor in the NFL. So maybe it'll look controversial, but he earned just a C for his yards after catch potential. There's more towards Yak than just having speed, as I factor in vision, contact balance, and ability to make defenders miss, which he just doesn't do. With his limitations, he also earned just a C+ for his future role, which was carried by his athleticism or RAS, which ended up earning him an A. As a summary of his strengths, he has a very tantalizing skill set with a good blend of great speed and big frame that will likely excite a team. On top of that, he has the versatility of playing as a big slot and being a mismatched weapon against smaller slot cornerbacks and linebackers. He also has great hands and a big catch rate, which should make it easier to fit a ball in over his heads over defenders. Finally, he's very tough, especially in the middle of the field when making catches, which should earn him a coach's respect. That being said, he's just way more limited than his perceived upside suggests. He's a very raw route runner whose cuts are very disappointing and led to some separation issues. On top of that, his ability to get yards after the catch is also disappointing, as he's a stiff runner and lacks the ability to make defenders miss. He also lacks the ability to make defenders miss with their press attempts, which could force him to stay in the slot. Finally, despite having this great frame, having this amazing athleticism, and having fantastic hands and ball skills, he has really struggled to be productive these past 2 seasons. So I have a hard time buying that he's going to suddenly be a big difference maker in the NFL with those limitations and limited use. So by taking the average of all his grades, TeSlaa earned a 2.54 out of 4, which puts him in my may have a future role tier. TeSlaa's a very fascinating physical profile, but the play profile just isn't there yet. He has good ball skills, which at least gives him a good foundation. However, he's just so far behind as a route runner and his release that it feels hard to feel that he can be trusted in a more meaningful playing time. I think the best approach for him right now is to lock down the gunner role for a team and slowly work on his route running to make the most of his opportunities when an injury does occur. At the very least, that contribution on special teams should help keep him on a roster since he has a great mold to be a gunner. As for a comp, I have Tyler Johnson as his comp. Both have great ball skills and were never afraid to finish catch through a hit. Also, both have very good ball tracking skills and the ability to run routes at all levels of the field. However, both are tight athletes with questionable bursts in their cuts and also lack nuance in their routes to fool defenders when they can't win with their athleticism or size on their own. Tyler Johnson has had struggled to make much of an impact in the NFL due to limited impact he can have on offense and special teams. However, I think TeSlaa could at least earn his keep by becoming a good special teams ace player. And that's all for part 3. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the receivers in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. This is just part 3 of 10, so there'll be still a lot more evals that'll be coming in the next few weeks. So be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just to written form the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll have the full written eval for each player out at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.